Hey, Visalia Christian Reformed Church. Welcome back to my midweek reflections. And it's taken me a little while to think about what to reflect on next. And I've had different ideas and I thought I was going to run with, and I finally settled on one. And I want to talk about and reflect on God as Trinity. Now, before you quick hang up and turn this off because this sounds like a boring idea, let me explain to you why it is I want to spend some time thinking about God as Trinity. Uh, and it has to do with what happened in my spiritual life uh, after my dad died last fall. You see, after my dad died, I read a bunch of books, devotionals and books on grief and all that stuff. They were really good, but the book that really helped me cope with what I was going through uh, was a book on the Trinity. And I think when I reflect back on that, the reason why the book on the Trinity helped me is in those days what I wanted and what I needed more than anything was to understand God, to know that God was with me, to try to understand what God was up to. And this book on the Trinity gave me a deeper understanding of who God is and a deeper enjoyment of who God is. Um, and I and I think what the author of this book says is very true. The author of this book said Christianity is not primarily about a lifestyle change. And I was discovering that and grieving for my dad, right? I was trying to change my things about my life to cope with my grief. And it wasn't really working. And the author goes on to say, so Christianity is not about a lifestyle change. It's about knowing God. In fact, I think you could even go further than that and to say that to know God and to enjoy God is what we're even saved for. This is why God saved us, so that we can know Him and enjoy Him. And the thing about it is, then, that once we know more about God and we know that God is love, oddly, the more loving we become. So even if Christianity is about knowing God, it is not first an intellectual thing. And I want to make that clear, right? And so when we talk about the Trinity in the weeks to come, this isn't just going to be some pointy-headed theological stuff. I really think this will be the meat of what it means to be a Christian in a daily walk and how we know God. Because the fact is that knowing God shapes how we pray. Knowing God better shapes how we relate to one another, shapes how we're better friends, shapes how we're better spouses and parents, and it shapes how we relate to the world around us. And knowing God has to begin with knowing God as Trinity. And I'm sure you've heard all these illustrations before, and I'm not going to go through any of these about describing the Trinity, right? Like the Trinity is like an egg with a shell and a white and a yolk, or the Trinity is like a shamrock, the three lobes yet one leaf, or the Trinity is like the three states of H2O, water, ice, and gas. I'm not going to go through any of those, mostly because all of those illustrations fail at some point, and if you were to try to use those illustrations to describe who God is to someone who's not a Christian out in the world, frankly, they're going to think you're silly. So I'm not going to go through that stuff. But then our next fallback thing, usually as Christians, and when we're trying to understand the Trinity, is once our illustrations have kind of run dry, is we tend to, and I've done this, just label the Trinity and God as a mystery. Well, God's a mystery. I mean, it seems so sage and pious to proclaim that, doesn't it? Right? I mean, and it is kind of like passing the buck a bit. And there is actually a problem with passing the Trinity off as just a mystery we have to live with and not bothering to try to understand it. And the problem is actually really simple. When the Apostle Paul uses the word mystery to describe God in Ephesians 3, he doesn't mean that God is a mystery like something that isn't worth our attempt to understand. In other words, that kind of mystery is like alien abductions, right? They're really not worth our time to try to figure out. That's just a mystery that is like, okay, whatever. We'll just live with whatever that might be. But when Paul uses the word mystery, he means that left on our own, we would never have figured out who God is. Because God is so beyond the human capacity to even imagine. So what God has had to do is reveal him to us, like he's whispering a secret to us. And this is what God does in the Bible. He tells us the secret of revealing who he is. And what he tells us about himself is that he is Trinity. And the Trinity that is revealed to us in the Bible is a God we can get to know. But it's more than just that. Knowing God as Trinity is essential to Christianity. Let me read to you a piece of the Athanasian Creed. By the way, the Athanasian Creed is one of the three chief historical creeds that all evangelical Christians and Roman Catholic Christians believe. We hold these three creeds. This is a universally held creed. So this is nothing that should be a shock or surprise to us, but I think it might be, this one line from the Athanasian Creed might be. This is what it says. Whosoever will be saved, before all things it is necessary to hold the orthodox faith, which faith everyone must keep whole and undefiled, or without doubt they shall perish everlastingly. And this then is that orthodox faith, that we worship God in Trinity and Trinity in unity. In other words, if you don't believe in the Trinity, if you don't know God as Trinity, you aren't a Christian. It's pretty blunt. It's rather hardcore. And it's very clear that essential to the Christian faith, no way around it, is that our God is three in one. What makes Christianity distinct, you see, is the very identity of who our God is. Not just what our God has done, but the identity of who our God is. Because theoretically, I could believe in the death of a man named Jesus who sacrificed himself on a cross for my sins. Because the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that. I could believe in the resurrection of the dead. Mormons believe that. I could believe in a creator God who has a plan to redeem the world. The Muslims believe that. I could even believe in salvation by grace alone. But if I do not believe that this God who is triune, then I am not Christian, because then I'm actually believing in a different God. Now, I know this seems intolerant, but it's not actually the point of intolerance. It's not about keeping other people from being Christian. It's simply about knowing God and worshiping God as he is. It reminds me of something that's happened to me, unfortunately, and way too many times, right? I'll be at a social gathering, which frankly seems like more than a decade ago since I've been at one of those. And I'm at one of these things, and I turn around and I'm looking for my wife, Allison, right? And I see someone in the corner of my eye who's the right height and is blonde. And so I've walked up to that person and put my hand on her shoulder, and oh boy, that's not Allison, right? I think we've all been there, especially as kids, right? When we're walking around a crowd and we go and we grab onto someone's pants and we think this is dad, and it's not dad. Now, it matters a lot to me that my wife is actually my wife. Her identity as my wife means that I have a specific relationship with her that is different than I do with any other blonde of a certain height on the face of the planet. It's just how it is. I have one wife, and it is Allison, and it is no other. The same thing kind of goes with God. The vague idea that sometimes we might have that we can just think of God as God, this vague sense of God, this undefinable sense of God, that might be enough, is as useful as me having a vague idea about Allison being a woman, and that's good enough. God reveals himself to us so that we can know him, and knowing him, we can have a relationship with him, and having a relationship with him, we can enjoy him. So it matters a lot that God is Trinity, because then we can know who God is. So, strap in, get ready for the irony of this boring doctrine of Trinity to breathe fresh life into you throughout the coming weeks. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you guys will stick with me too. Talk to you later.